Justin Gimelstob began playing tennis at the age of 8 and was a top-ranked player in every age group from 12 years of age through 18. He won the USTA National Championship several times.
Inducted into his high school Hall of Fame, Justin also achieved extraordinary athletic and academic success while attending UCLA.
In 1996, Justin earned academic honors while achieving the #1 ranking in singles and doubles tennis while leading the #1 ranked UCLA tennis team. He also won the 1996 NCAA doubles championship while maintaining a 4.0 GPA.
After UCLA, Justin turned professional and competed at the ATP World Tour for 13 years.
In 1998, he won the Australian Open and French Open mixed doubles championship with Venus Williams. He represented the USA in the US Davis Cup in 1998 and 2001. Justin achieved a career high ranking of 63rd in singles and 18th in doubles while winning 17 titles.
Justin retired in 2007 from the sport of tennis. He immediately transitioned to every facet of sports business, including broadcasting, production, talent representation, and brand management.
Justin is passionate about philanthropy and is dedicated to the Justin Gimelstob Children's Fund, which has raised over $1 million for children-focused causes. Justin was recently honored for his charitable contributions by the Hope for Children Research Foundation as their 2020 Humanitarian of the Year.
Justin is now president of the Financial Benefits Research Group, the FBR Group, a full-service insurance and financial management business. Justin is a proud father of his 6-year-old son, Brandon.
On today's episode of Industry Elites, Vicki and I are really excited to get the chance to talk to former professional tennis player and currently the president of the Financial Benefits Research Group, Justin Gimelstob. We're going to be talking about his experience going pro and what his transition has been like going into the business world. So we're excited to have you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So we just want to see initially, Justin, how are you doing in quarantine? How's social distance treating you?
Well, it's been a very interesting time. I mean, unprecedented. If you think about it, I don't know that there's ever been a situation where every single person in the world is affected. I know people compare this to the Spanish flu, but based on the population and the consequences and so forth, I don't know that it's necessarily a comp. I mean, every single person in the world, doesn't matter your socioeconomic standing, your location, your geography, your occupation, your age. I mean, every single person. I mean, it's a very bizarre, unprecedented situation. Obviously, it's having catastrophic consequences on humanity and the economy. But I am a believer, and this is probably from my sports background, I am a believer. First of all, I'm an optimist, and I'm a believer that chaos creates opportunities. I mean, if you look at the history of the world and some of the most challenging times, there has been incredible innovation. There have been opportunities that come out of it. So you just have to try and see where the world's going, see how the world is changing. Every industry is challenged in a different way. And, try and, even though it sounds kind of Pollyanna, try and make the best of the situation. Now, obviously, myself and some others and, a certain group are in a little bit of a different situation. I kind of narrow it down to 3 groups. If you're still in your home, you have enough food, and your friends and family are healthy. I mean, that's kind of now the demarcation point for, where life is okay or good enough. But also in a perverse way, I have to say, I mean, I'm a single father. I have a 6-year-old boy. And I suspect that years from now, and I've talked about this with some other parents, I mean, years from now, with everyone running 1,000,000 miles a minute, I'll look back at this and be like, wow, I was able to see my son learn how to read and ride his bike for the first time and see how he handled some challenges in school and see him interact with his friends on, Zoom, or just be around him more at a young age. It's such a formative time. For me professionally, I also see it as an opportunity going into a new business a couple of years ago and, having a unique situation as a new business, because it's actually an established business that my father established. It's over 40 years old. So it has an existing business and clientele, me learning a whole new business. So managing all the old accounts, managing the office, learning the business, and trying to create new business. So with everyone being stationary, and while, getting people to spend money or even think about money isn't that easy right now, it's still an opportunity to service clients and for me to learn about the business and all different parts of the business. And Zoom has made it very efficient to meet, set up Zoom calls with professional groups and network groups. I mean, so every day I'm either speaking to clients, auditing policies, studying different things online, Zooming with estate planners or CPAs or business managers. So just once again, just trying to do the best I can with this situation. And let me put it this way. When I hear a lot of people complaining that there's not enough on Netflix, that's not a situation that I'll just figure out how to try and come out of this best prepared.
So it sounds like you haven't really had any hindrances with quarantine. Have you found it has kind of given you more time per se? Like not necessarily more time because you sound incredibly busy, but more time to kind of stop and think, to establish things in a better direction, in a more creative approach?
Completely. I mean, I'm 43 years old. This is by far, not even close, no hyperbole, the most I've been in one place at a time my whole life. I mean, I've traveled being a professional athlete, tennis, traveling around the world. And then as soon as I retired, getting involved in sports business and production and TV and sports entertainment. There has never been, not even close, a period of time where I've been in one place this long. So being able to establish a routine, I mean, obviously I've definitely had effects with quarantine, not being able to spend as much time with friends and family. And obviously, like I said, the economy is in a brutal place. But in terms of being able to manage my day and manage my schedule and try and do things that maybe you've been pushing off. I mean, even your own health. I mean, getting into even a sleep routine, which is so tough to do when you're traveling so much, working out, looking at your health, looking at things that maybe, you put on the back burner because you're churning at such a quick rate. I mean, it's a bizarre time. I'm not like one of those fate, everything happens for a reason people, but like there does seem like a weird type of world. It's like a mandatory timeout, like the world healing in a way. Like it's like some sort of unique, I think it's going to be one of the most unique periods in history. I think people will be talking about this for generations and generations to come.
It's definitely something for the history books, that's for sure. Vicki and I were talking about it previously, and we were saying that this will be something incorporated into the books. And then it's going to be interesting looking back when kids are going to come to us and be like, oh, what was that coronavirus that happened like 20, 30 years ago? And we're like, oh my goodness, you don't even know.
And I'll tell you this, like in the business with FBR Group, we cover all forms of insurance. So if it's indemnifiable, we do it. Anything from private client insurance, high net worth people with expensive jewelry, art collections, or homes or cars or private planes, boats, to high-level life insurance policies, to group medical insurance. One of the challenges in insurance is trying to explain to people the value of mitigating risk. And it's conceptual. Other products that people sell are tangible. A car, a house, a tennis racket, a vacation, you have this type of room at a hotel. There's no time in the history, I mean, for this generation and numerous to come once again, that are not going to be very conscious or very scarred by the concept of mitigating risk. So whether it's your health, whether it's your money, whether it's being diversified, whether it's life insurance, health insurance, loss of value insurance, business cancellation insurance, people are at least going to understand it. Whether they buy it or not, that's going to be the other decision. Whether they buy into it or not. But, my father was a high school basketball coach that started a business from scratch with no experience. And, as I've taken this over, I never even knew he was teaching me. I never even knew I absorbed some of the things he said. But I do remember him saying, in terms of insurance, like you spend 1% to 2% to protect the 98. Like that's essentially the concept. And think about now if, obviously everything is easy in hindsight. But I mean, think about, if more people bought into that concept. And obviously this is not a fair thing to say in this situation, because how do you prepare for something that's never happened? But, it's just a very interesting time. But like I said, in every industry or whatever it is, you better try to figure out where things are going, because they're not going to be the same.
So with that, you're kind of mentioning the changes in insurance. Do you think going forward, this is going to kind of create almost COVID insurance, or it's going to pivot to kind of have, how you have like act of God and all those other kind of levels of insurance for like your vehicle or something? Do you think they're going to do that for health insurance? It's going to have like a clause for these type viruses going forward, or?
Well, the interesting part, first of all, luckily, fortunately, and I think it's a great sign that health insurance has been covering COVID, which I think is, which obviously is needed and should happen, but not everything in life that should happen does. So that's a positive. Other forms of insurance, I think it's going to be the opposite. I think that they will have carve-outs for this because insurance companies couldn't survive this. If everyone, just think about it. If everything, let me put it this way, there's over 62 tennis tournaments in the world. Only one tournament had a form of insurance that was comprehensive enough that covered what's happening right now. And it's not because they specifically covered against pandemic. It's because their policy was broad and aggressive enough that it didn't carve out certain things, which means obviously the premiums were higher. But, that tournament is Wimbledon, and they have other unique circumstances as well. For example, they have a queen. A queen is, very old. If God forbid some member of the queen, it's such a unique situation. I wouldn't be surprised if they had to cancel the tournament or cancel a couple of days for that. So the past 20 years, they've paid almost $40 million in premiums, and they covered up to $150 million. So they got $150 million not to play Wimbledon this year, but they still are going to make a lot less money than they would if they played. I'll give you another example on the other side of that, the U.S. Open. So the U.S. Open has about $400 million in revenue. They used to have insurance because they didn't have roofs. So if you lost a session, for example, if it rained, they had insurance, loss of session insurance. The rule was if you played less than an hour and you had tickets, you got it refunded. If you played an hour and 1 minute, you didn't. So now, but years later, the U.S. Open has a bunch of roofs. So they're not vulnerable to having to repay their patrons or their consumers. So they decrease their insurance. So now if they don't have the U.S. Open, they're on the hook for $400 million. I mean, that's all of it. I mean, if college football doesn't play, I mean, I don't know if people understand, college football and college basketball fund the whole athletic department. If you don't have college football, there's a very good chance that most non-revenue college sports will be shut down, at least for a period of time. The consequences of this are so severe, but moving forward, think about it. Every tennis tournament, every concert, every event, every single thing, every event, every live event you would suspect is going to require or need some form of insurance. Now, obviously, it's going to have to be affordable, and it's going to have to, and that's what I'm working on right now, kind of packages, whether it's for sporting events or entertainment events or studios with movies, or, for example, acts in Vegas, for example, if you have, they already have this where you insure against concerts. And when Justin Timberlake goes on announces a 200 city concert tour, they've already been insuring against that. Britney Spears signs a 200 appearance at the Caesars Palace. They insure against that if she gets hurt or something happens. So that's a lot of that has been the foundation of insurance. Now it's just, people are just going to be way more conscious of it. So once again, I'm just trying to use this time to be best organized. That's what I'm doing. But it's a bizarre time. It's like you go outside sometimes, and living here in LA, it's like it used to take 20 minutes to go down 2 blocks to get a cup of coffee. Now it's like it looks like a Western movie. But that being said, here in LA, a lot of people are out. They're with masks, but they're working out. It's one of the benefits of being here in LA. It's beautiful, so you could run, you could jog, you could at least be outside and feel healthier. But I feel badly for people that are cooped up in small areas. I can understand going stir crazy. So it's a bizarre time. And also, and I am not going to get political because there's no upside in that. But obviously, the fact that it has a significant political component that's kind of dividing the nation as well is unfortunate.
At least you guys have the sun. I would have to say about that. We have to say we are very jealous by the sun and at least getting to go outside for long periods of time. So obviously, we were talking a lot about the initial aspects of insurance and how that plays into effect via Corona now. But I think we'll take a couple steps back and maybe go into what it was before you were in the insurance life, and maybe starting off with some aspects of your tennis career and what potentially drew you to want to play tennis professionally.
Well, it's interesting. So my family is very sports oriented. My dad and uncle both played college basketball. My dad was a high school basketball coach. My uncle was a college basketball coach. My uncle was Bobby Knight's assistant at Indiana, and then head coach at George Washington. My dad won 2 state championships coaching in New Jersey. So we all had a sports background. I'm one of 3 brothers, so I'm a middle boy. We were just everything. Basketball, baseball, soccer, you name it, we played it. But no one in our family had ever hit a tennis ball. None, zero, no tennis exposure. And then my older brother, went to a camp, went to an all sports camp. And part of it was he had some tennis balls and he liked it and came home and started playing a little bit more. And me being a younger brother, I followed him into it and we liked it and showed some early progress. I always had pretty good hand-eye coordination. And then it kind of just spiraled. We still played all other sports, but I just we all picked it up really quickly. We were all good players. My older brother, played college tennis. My younger brother played college tennis. But, tennis is a very unique sport, besides the fact that it's individual. At a young age, and this is one of the reasons why I think it struggles a bit in America now, is that it takes a lot of repetition and a lot of technique. And that's not really a great matchup for this ADHD generation. Because if you don't have good technique, and a foundation, it really limits your ability later on. But there aren't a lot of 7, 8, 9-year-olds that want to do the same thing, 1,000 times in a row. So you have to be wired a certain way, and you have to have good coaching, but you also have good coaching that makes it fun enough where it doesn't feel like working for a living at 8. I had a great coach when I was younger that made it fun, that I liked. And, I had a great group of kids. That also was something that was fortunate. We played at a tennis club where you had a bunch of older kids that were good, and you made it fun. And it was, they were for your friends, and you were competitive and you wanted to get better. And I had older and younger brothers playing. So it was I just kind of fell in love with the sport. Still played all other sports, but just fell in love with it. And, then did very well, probably better than we even thought, because we didn't know it. We didn't know anything about it. It's like, think about if no one in your family ever played basketball, and then you went to your first AAU game and you dominated it. And people were like, all of a sudden they're like, well, who's that kid? We had no idea. We had no history in it. We're just okay, go to court 2 and play this guy. Okay, and beat him. Well, then afterward, you know who that kid was? He was a hot shot from Texas. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't know that. I just played and beat him. Okay. It just kind of went like that. And then all of a sudden I'm the best player in the country. It starts with okay, first, I'm the best player in New Jersey. And then it's okay, well, that's oh, you should go play the national tournament. It's okay, well, you're the best 12-year-old in the country. It's oh, okay, well, that's young. There's some kids that are young. It's oh, okay, well, then you're the best kid in the country in the 14s, and then the 16s. And now people are then the 18s. And then are you going to turn pro? Then you're number 1 player in college. And it's just kind of then it just takes a life of your own. And then at that point, you're all in. And I loved it. I love competing. I love the sport. I love trying to excel. And it's just, I don't know how much of it's genetic or how much of it's environment, but it was the same thing with school. It was the same thing with anything, whether I was playing checkers or hopscotch or whatever it was, school, whatever it was. I did the best, really tried hard and wanted to work at it and competed hard. And I just loved it. I think sports are so great for kids. I didn't have a quote unquote normal childhood. I wasn't going to, every party or every, we weren't taking cruises or going to Florida or the Caribbean, because all holidays were based on tennis tournaments. And looking back now that I'm a father, the sacrifices that my parents made. 3 kids, tournaments, being on the East Coast, almost all the tournaments are in New York or Long Island. We're all playing different age groups. One tournament's in Long Island, another one's in New York City, another one's in New Jersey. The commitment that parents make to help their kids excel is exceptional. But my parents also demanded, they were both educators. My mom was a teacher. My dad was, he was a phys ed teacher and then the high school basketball coach. But, we went to top level private schools. I actually graduated high school early. School was so good that I got my core curriculum done so early. I was done at 16. I went to one of the best high schools in the country, private school called Newark Academy. We won the state champ. One of the neatest things, me and my brothers all played in the same team, and we won the high school state championship. And then I was going to decide if I was going to turn pro or go to college. And I got my first recruiting letter from UCLA when I was 10.
Oh my goodness. That's pretty young. Is that normal age that kids would see recruiting letters for for college at 10 years old?
I don't know. I didn't have much of a point of reference. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
I do have a letter from Notre Dame and a letter from Kentucky for my son when he was 3 weeks old, offering him a scholarship. So maybe that's younger.
Wow. That's a little bit younger than that for sure.
But I think that was a little bit more of a spoof, kind of just being funny, but just friends of mine over the years have become coaches. But yeah, Rick Pitino not Rick Pitino, sorry, John Calipari from Kentucky sent one, and the basketball coach from Notre Dame sent one, just kind of joking around, but it was pretty funny. I never took any recruiting trips. My recruiting trip to UCLA consisted of the coach saying, let's go to a basketball game. He knew I loved basketball. And we drove to an apartment complex, and I was like, I didn't know where we were going. He's like, we're just going to meet the friend, have a little lunch first, and I'll meet you up in the apartment 3C. And I go up to the apartment and knock on the door, and it was John Wooden. And ended up spending 3 hours talking to John Wooden about sports and life and competing and family. And that's kind of all I needed. John Wooden. I went to UCLA for 2 years, had a great experience, was a All-American student athlete, had highest grade point average of any student athlete. When I was there, our team was number 1 in the country. I won the NCAAs in doubles. I was number 1 in singles. And then I turned pro. Yeah, that kind of brings it up to me starting as a pro at 19.
Well, definitely more than anybody, the pressures of trying to really excel in this professional career that you wanted to do, but then also balancing school. So maybe you could talk a little bit to our listeners about why you're really passionate about starting a scholarship foundation, and then from there, what you really hope students can get out of receiving that money, what they're hoping to get from it.
Well, look, I think giving back, if you have a platform, is responsibility. I think that if you have the opportunity to affect change and you've been given a lot, whether it's you've been given talent or you've been given opportunity or you've had some success or you have a platform or you have some resources, I think it is a responsibility and even almost an obligation, not in a negative way, but to give back to others that haven't had the opportunity. When I first turned pro, I started a foundation called the Justin Gimelstob Children's Fund to raise money for the pediatric cancer hospital. My brothers and I were all born there. So that was important to me. And we've done events and we raised over $1 million for that foundation. But then my dad passed away, which was incredibly traumatic. I wanted to do something that kind of honored him, and he loved sports and he loved sports, and he always prioritized school, and he loved college sports. He loved college basketball. So I wanted to do something that kind of supported the college athlete, the student athlete, because I know how hard it is. I mean, it's brutal. Yeah. So that's kind of the first thing. I'm hoping to do more. I'm on social media with people that are submitting applications, especially during this period of time. I mean, it's uncertain. Everyone is, I don't care who you are, relatively, everyone's struggling financially. So I just thought it'd be a nice time to try and help a few people and see how it goes and expand the program. I have every intention of expanding the program. This was the first initiative. And so whether it goes with, I've been getting some notes from people saying, this is so great, but, my child's in high school and could use some help, or my child, we could use help with, equipment or other opportunities to try and excel, so we could put ourselves in a better position to get, play on our high school team or get some students a college scholarship. So I'll look at all different aspects of it, but it's an initiative that I'm very proud of, and really it was completely in honor of my father.
Just pivoting kind of back to your pro tennis career, what was your everyday look like back then? Like, did you get up, have a strict kind of fitness routine, and then just kind of hit the courts, or what did that look like? Professional
tennis is a little bit different, once again, because it's individual and because it's essentially 47 weeks a year. There's no off season. So you kind of make your own schedule. Mm-hmm. And I really would break it more into like when you're at a tournament or when you're training. So it's two completely different lives. So let's start with training. So if I'm not at a tournament and I'm training, generally you'd have 2 practice sessions. So you'd wake up, go to your first practice session, which would generally be more like drills and working on some technique or some things. Then, that would be probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Then you get lunch. Sometimes you take a nap. And then you usually go out and play something competitively, whether it was points, a practice set, a practice match, and then you do some sort of fitness. And then after that, you probably do some sort of rehab. So whether it was, stretching, a massage, cold plunge, jacuzzi, something like that to get your body, heal your body, and then have dinner and lay around. Because really, when you're doing that, you're putting your body in your body, mind, you're taxing yourself so much, you really have to rest. That's where a lot of the recovery comes from. So it's not a very complicated life. It's pretty formulaic. Not everyone does it that way. There's, some people practice once a day. Some people do more fitness. But that's general. Sometimes if you do 2 a day, a bunch of days, you'll do 1 tennis, 1 practice, and then you'll probably take off 1 day a week. A lot of it depends on how long you have before the next tournament, or if there's a particular stroke that you want to work on, or if there's something what are you struggling with? Are you struggling with playing points? Are you struggling with your serve? Are you struggling with your transition game? Are you struggling with your fitness? So you kind of focus on that. But it's very interesting because after you retire, life is so different, and that's why
I can imagine.
I think that's one of the reasons why some athletes really struggle transitioning to post-professional athletic life, and some people don't. And that's a big part of what I try and teach people is that, if you use the qualities that allow you to be successful as an athlete, you should be able to be really successful in your next endeavor. Because think about it, you're dealing with discipline, you're dealing with success, you're dealing with failure, you're dealing with pressure. In a team sports, you're dealing with working with others, you're dealing with leadership, you're dealing with, basically running your own business, which is you. So it's very different. Because when you're a professional athlete, you work very, very hard for a short period of time, and it's all based on you. Your coach is focusing on you. Your trainer is focusing on you. You're focusing on you. You rest to play better. You eat to play better. Like it's very selfish. And it should be. It's a very selfish life. You're managing and saving your energy, even in terms of how you put out energy and engage with other people in order to maximize it for your performance. So it's a very, most time people around you are there for you. So if you're not conscious of realizing the downside of that and making sure you understand that that's just part of the professional dynamic, that's not actually real. And that actually shouldn't be transferred over to personal relationships, or certainly not when you're done playing. You have to really be conscious of that, because, if you think that's real life, and a lot of times people think it is because from such a young age, they're so catered to, that's a tough habit to break, because if you think that's your reality, when you get out in the real world, it certainly isn't. But moving on to the schedule, when you do play a tournament, then it's much different, because then you're not practicing as much. The thing is, you get to a tournament, the first thing you do is get a feel for the courts. One of the other challenges in tennis, every situation, every tournament plays differently. Even if, besides the fact that some tournaments are hard courts, some tournaments are clay courts, some tournaments are grass courts, some tournaments are indoors, every single tournament plays differently. And because the balls are different, the temperature is different, the wind is different, the altitude could be different. So, you hit a couple balls, try and get a feel for the conditions. Then you get your racket strung, because you need to get your racket strung to correlate to the conditions, and then hopefully you get a couple of practices in, you get a feel for the ball. Then you play a couple of practice sets. You look at the draw, you see who you play. You try and practice with someone who has a similar style. So if you're playing a lefty, you want to try and practice with a lefty. If you're playing with someone who moves well and doesn't hit that hard, you want to play with someone like that. If you're playing with someone that's big and hits hard but makes a lot of errors, so you want to try and, it's like scouting. You want to try and simulate the type of matchup, and then you look to see when you play, and the schedule dictates how you prepare. So if you play a night match, some people will wake up and get a little hit, for 30 minutes just to break a sweat, go back, take a nap, and then come back before they play at night. Some people, if you have an early match, it all correlates to your schedule. It's all based on the same concept that when are you going to warm up? When are you going to eat? In enough time where you have the fuel in your system, prepare your bag, get your rackets, you get your racket strung, you have to change your clothes. There's a reason why a lot of tennis players are OCD. It's very routine oriented. It's very repetitive, because that's one of the things that you could control that helps take some of the pressure away. It's like, I can control this. I can't control how he plays. I can't control if it's hot. I can't control the calls. I can't control, this is what I can control. So, you make your sports drinks, you make sure your bags, with your supplements or your energy bars. Then you go out there and go compete. And if you win, you do it all again. And if you lose, you evaluate why, and you put your stuff in a courtesy car, you slam the trunk, and you get on to the next tournament. So it's a lot of it's like a traveling circus. And, it's a combination of a traveling circus and the movie with John Candy and Steve Martin, Trains, Planes, and Automobiles.
You mentioned that you played in a lot of different tournaments and they all kind of have different conditions. Do you have a favorite tournament that you've played in, or a fond memory of tournaments that you'd want to share with our listeners?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Obviously everyone knows about the big ones. Wimbledon is special. When you play Wimbledon for the first time, or if you're lucky enough to play on center court at Wimbledon, which I put on center court I put on big courts in general, a disproportionate amount to my success level, just through happenstance, and also just maybe playing a lot of very good players, people wanting them on a big court, not because of me. So I played on center court at Wimbledon a bunch. I played Pete Sampras on center court at Wimbledon. I played Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi on center court of the U.S. Open. I played on center court of the Australian Open. I played center court of the French Open. Those tournaments are obviously so special. They have so much tradition. U.S. Open was obviously very close to me because I grew up playing on the East Coast, and seeing the U.S. Open was a huge source of motivation for me to strive for. I want to play at the U.S. Open. I want to be at the U.S. Open. So, as a young kid, you go to the U.S. Open, you dream about playing there. And my first Grand Slam win was at the U.S. Open. I was 18 years old. I'd won the national championships in the 18 division, which gives you an automatic entry in the pro tournament. But usually, the guy gets his butt kicked. Like if you look at the history of the person who wins that tournament to go play in the U.S. Open, it's like 95% of them lose first round.
Oh, wow.
Because you're kid, you're not fully developed, and you're playing full pros, and it's your first time playing. But anyway, I got lucky, but played a great match and won this epic match at 18 in 5 sets, in front of my home crowd. And, have some amazing pictures of my dad coming out to the court and hugging him, and I still remember it. I could remember it exactly. So that was an incredible moment. Playing Pete Sampras on center court at Wimbledon, winning the first set. I got my butt kicked the next 3, but, just being on center court at Wimbledon, winning the Australian Open mixed doubles with Venus Williams on center court, winning the French Open mixed doubles with Venus on center court at the French Open, playing Davis Cup, representing your country. I had some great experiences playing at the LA Open, which is at UCLA. That was where I was from, and I played so many matches there, so I felt comfortable. I beat Andre Agassi there in one of my first pro matches in front of my home crowd, or adopted home crowd. Beat Patrick Rafter there once as well, who was touring the world. So yeah, I just a lot of great experiences. Tennis, everyone wishes they did better. I had some injuries. Everyone wishes they could have done a few things differently. It's like Einstein says, the definition of a true genius is someone that could learn from someone else's mistakes. Unfortunately, you usually have to make the mistakes yourself to learn, and I've made plenty. But at the end of the day, I felt fortunate to be a professional athlete and had great relationships and great experiences. I retired in a very special way, and once again, completely lucky. I got to play one of my best friends, Andy Roddick, who's won the U.S. Open, and I played him on center court at night, my last match, and we had this pretty competitive match relative to how much better he was than me. And I remember I almost won the first set. I was up 5-3 in the tiebreak, and I lost the tiebreak, and I lost the next couple sets. And the person interviewed me after and said, well, what would have happened if you won the first set? And I said, I would have lost in 4 sets. But they ended up, since they knew I had a passion for broadcasting, they gave me the mic. Andy and I ended up basically having open mic night on center court of the U.S. Open on national television for like 15 minutes. And it was completely organic. It was based on an opportunity that was lucky, but actually I was uniquely prepared for, because I'd been injured a bunch the previous couple of years, and I interned at Tennis Channel, really studied broadcasting, and was well prepared. It was organic, but it's no different than anything. You do the work. You never know when it's gonna necessarily hit, or you never know when the opportunity is going to arise. But it did that night. I immediately got TV contracts. I immediately got a job with The Tonight Show. I immediately got a job with Tennis Channel, and it kind of started my post-career off with a lot of momentum.
So that was definitely what it sounds like, a pretty ideal transition in comparison probably to other individuals who had maybe a harder time. So it seemed like the stars had aligned for you in that moment to transition to your next phase in life. So do you feel like starting off in that business, coming off being a professional tennis player, was there a certain expectation that people held for you in the broadcast world? Like, do you feel like it was less pressure, or did you feel like there was more pressure in a different way?
No, look, there aren't a lot of spots in tennis. Tennis is a niche sport, so, it's very competitive, but I loved it. I didn't really see it that way. Like, I actually felt less pressure. I thought I actually thought that I would have a better career after tennis. I actually thought that I was better suited to success off court than I was on. And, I thought I was a good player, but, I did have that dynamic where I was always the best up to a certain level, and then you turn pro, and then you're playing the best of the best. And I was like, I struggled with it because I'd always won so much. I probably lost more in the first couple months as a pro than I did my whole life. So that really jarred me and affected me. But, I just didn't, whether it's self-confidence or arrogance or just self-belief, there's a fine line between all of them. I thought I knew the game. I thought I understood presentation and television, and I'm very innately curious. I love asking questions. I love doing interviews. I love hearing people's stories. I think it's a huge part of sports is creating a personal connection with the fans, so they are emotionally invested. Like I learned very early on, and I believe this in all things in life. Indifference is the enemy, especially in TV now. And you see it with all the talk shows and all the debate shows. Indifference is the enemy. They want people to care one way or the other. They want you to root for you because they love you, or root against you because they want to see you fail. I don't know that that's great for society or humanity. You see it on social media. Most of it's, very negative, but people want a platform, people want to vent, people want to engage, and that was that part. Then I also saw that, there's a huge opportunity in production, just being around tennis and sports, seeing the value of the actual content. So I also went into that market and created a company called Without Limits Productions, which I named after from a movie, which I saw, which I loved because I'm a sucker for sports movies. It was based on Prefontaine, who was a middle distance runner who was a renegade, and I felt a kindred spirit toward. Then I did what I probably liked the most, which was represent the players. Tennis is a sport where they don't have unions. The players on the ATP tour actually own half the tour. So it's not like baseball and basketball and football where they have a players union and then they go to collective bargaining and the owners and so forth. And they have a commissioner, and tennis players own half the tour. So I had seen during the course of my career that the players were poorly represented, and it was reflected in their percentage of revenue. It was reflected in, players' rights and how the player leadership and player pension contributions, all those things. And I understood why. Talent generally loses to ownership if they're not organized and mobilized, because ownership has institutional knowledge. Ownership, has the ability has more time. I mean, players, it's tough enough to compete. It's tough to them to commit time to boardrooms and politics and so forth. But I saw the detriment that it had on players. So I really had a plan to get the top players engaged, which had never really happened. And the other part with tennis that's so tough is that everyone wants different things. I mean, you have top players want more money in guarantees. You have lower ranked players want more money in prize money. You have some players want more on clay courts. Some players want more on grass courts. The Americans want more in the U.S. Top players want a shorter schedule. Lower ranked players want a longer schedule. Some players want a 2-year ranking. Some players want a 1-year ranking. So very, very challenging to get individual sport athletes to get on the same page. And the absence of them doing that, or ownership knew they could just divide and conquer them because they can't get their stuff together. So, they're making it easy for us. So I tried to change that culture, and I'm proud of the fact that me and some others created a team that I think we did. We're very fortunate that players like Roger Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and Andy Murray, and some others committed their time and believed in our plan, and it significantly, the results of what we accomplished for the players was revolutionary. I mean, and the results are concrete. What the player representatives accomplished was unprecedented, and it's concrete. It was reflected in just huge increases in prize money, in supplementing and compensating player pension, players' rights, player power, the ability for the players to be better supported in every way, whether it's from health, medical services, calendar, and it really happened from just being able to organize and mobilize the players and give them a powerful voice. Talent should have a lot of leverage if it's used in the right way. And fortunately, we were able to have some success there. And it really kind of changed the way talent and the players, what their partnership was with the tournaments.
So I think it's interesting that you said that at this point, still in those last few years, that players still didn't have that representation. But I guess going back to how you said initially when you started off in your tennis career, you really didn't have anything to go off of. You guys were just moving on from one tournament to the next tournament and kind of playing it by ear. So it's interesting that now at this point still you're able to give that back to other players and giving them the advice potentially that you maybe didn't have.
Well, that's what was my motivation. I saw during the course of my career how pathetic the player representation was. I mean, I saw what the percentage of revenue between talent and ownership was. I saw how little power we had, and I knew how much power talent could have. But it was just not being executed. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, when I played, you get vested for a certain year for your pension contribution. I got about $8,000 a year. Now, the players, after what we did, get about $60,000 a year. And, prize money, the percentage of revenue was so low. And, by the time we were done, we increased player compensation by over 100%. Also, overall value to the sport increased as well, but the players were just not getting their fair share of a partnership. And the reason is that, like I said, they weren't organized. They weren't mobilized. It was easy for the tournaments and the other representatives to divide and conquer them. And quite frankly, the other player representatives weren't good enough at their jobs.
So I wanted to actually touch on a story that you had mentioned previously. So I can't remember the little boy's name, but you'd mentioned that there was a young tennis player who was really wanting to play tennis, but was in a wheelchair. So you really helped to get him connected to the right individuals to really kickstart his own tennis career. career. So maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
It's one of the most incredible things I've ever been involved with, and one of the proudest things I've ever been involved with. This is a long time ago now, but a friend of mine in North Carolina who actually went to UCLA, his name is Bill Barber. He was a good player at UCLA. He got in touch with me. He said, "Hey, Justin, I want you to know there's this incredible story. There's this kid who has this disease where he basically doesn't have, any lower extremities. He doesn't have legs, but he's playing real tennis tournaments. I mean, he's playing real tournaments." Wow. And obviously his body, he figured it out and compensated in certain ways. And he hits the ball and he's beating real players. Now, obviously he wasn't going to be able to do that for much longer. So he asked me if I wanted to do a story on him, and I went to go meet him. And I was so fascinated by him that I ended up doing a whole show about him. In doing it, I introduced him to some players. I did the show. I got Andy Roddick and Jim Curry to play with him. I interviewed his family. I did a whole 30-minute show on him, on the inspiring story of Connor Stroud. And in doing it, I introduced him to wheelchair tennis and introduced him to the U.S. Tennis Committee and the Paralympic Committee, and focused on stuff like this, and got him a wheelchair, explained to him, got him with the group, got him the funding, got him on a team. And I mean, it's completely changed and made his life. His passion for tennis was translated and transferred over to wheelchair tennis. And he's one of the best players in the world. And he travels around the world playing wheelchair tennis, representing the United States. And, he's, like I said, he's one of the best in the world. And, I feel like I had a small role in it. He's got a beautiful family. He's a great kid. And, it was really something I'm very proud about.
That's an amazing story.
People should check it out. I mean, there's a show on it. There's video online. Connor Stroud is on social media, but it's a heartwarming story. I mean, it's just truly, you talk about, when you think about sports, people obviously think about LeBron James or Roger Federer or, Tiger Woods. But, I truly believe sports, or even life, is about maximizing your God-given ability. I actually believe truly that Connor Stroud is just as successful as LeBron James in terms of, by the metrics of what is achievement. And in my view, achievement is maximizing God-given potential. Now, obviously, he doesn't have $1 billion, and he didn't have X amount of championship rings, and he doesn't have, 100 billion, social media followers. But in terms of maximizing potential, which is what I believe life is about, I think they're comparable.
No, definitely. I think I also watched the segment on YouTube as well, and just hearing of his story and like the struggles that he went through to be able to accomplish his dreams essentially is something that can motivate a lot of people. And the fact that there's individuals like yourself who are willing to give certain kids a shot that potentially they might not have had prior. And who knows if we didn't help each other out, who knows if we would even be better off, right? We wouldn't. We would need those individuals to give us that helping hand. So that's definitely admirable.
Well, look, he never played in a wheelchair, and he wasn't necessarily stubborn, but he obviously wanted to keep playing, and it was very unique, but he was going to have limitations, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So, I did the show. I didn't make any money. I did the show specifically to give him exposure in order to help raise money. I got some sponsorship. I donated it all to helping him try and, get started, and got him in a wheelchair and connected him with the right people. And it was, like I said, it's one of those things. Once again, I feel like it's nice that I did it, like in theory, but it actually was better for me. Like I got so much satisfaction, and was so inspired by who he was and his family. It seems like I'm doing something for them, but they really ended up doing it for me.
So I guess before we kind of round this out, I have one final question for you. Just kind of knowing what you know now, is there any advice that you would give to either your younger self or younger people kind of starting out now? Or I guess anyone starting out in tennis now?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, Einstein said, a true genius could learn from someone else's mistakes. I mean, unfortunately, you do generally have to learn from your own, but I do think that's also a role of coaches and mentors to try and curb that, try and help minimize the mistakes as much as possible. But I would say this, like sports, obviously a huge part of, sports, the main point of sport is winning, but you have to put it in perspective. I think it's important to realize that you want to do everything you can to be successful. Like I told you, focusing on maximizing potential. I just know when I work with my son now, and I want to expose him to a lot of sports. I don't necessarily want him to sacrifice everything to be a professional athlete, but I believe in sports and the value it brings in so many different ways. But you really, and it sounds corny, but it really is about the process. It really is about working hard. It's really about, if you could use sports or all things as a vehicle, as learning experiences, whether it's dealing with adversity or dealing with success or failure. Like when I talk to my son, we talk about 4 things that, if he's going to do it, that I expect. And it's never entailed winning. It's work your hardest. It's never give up. Good sportsmanship. It's respect the process, things like that. Like I said, if you're going to do it, I want him to try and do it right. I'm going to make sure he has the right technique. I'm going to make sure that he works hard at it. I'm a big believer in that. But, just be a little easier on yourself. I was very tough. I took losses very hard. I was definitely a culprit of tying success to my self-esteem too much and not doing a better job differentiating how I was doing or what I was ranked or how I was as an athlete versus how I was as an overall person, which is understandable, and it's a huge challenge out there. Probably manage my training a little bit better. I think I was incredibly hardworking, but I think it was almost a little too much out of fear and compulsion. So I think I beat my body up a little bit too much. I think listening to your body a little bit more, but that's also changed as we've gotten older with this better sports medicine and better, when I was training, there wasn't as much focus on core and non-weight bearing. Things have really evolved over the course of, generations of athletics, and Pilates and yoga came in later. And I love that stuff, and, strengthening your core and activating, all your muscles and stuff. Like there's lots I would do differently, but at the end of the day, I did the best I could with what I had at the time. I think everyone just has to cut themselves some slack, but there's things I would do differently. But I'm proud that in general, I could say I did the best I could with what I had at the time.
I think that's a really good ending for us here. But any last words you want to give to our listeners, Justin, before we end our podcast for today?
I think that was a good finish.
I think it was as well. So thank you for listening to our podcast with Justin Gimelstob. You can look for him on his social media platforms that we'll list in our description. So take a look at those, and have a nice day, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us.